I didn't move to this town looking for trouble. In fact, all I wanted was peace and space, two luxuries I'd spent decades fighting for. After 26 years in the Army, including 3 deployments, I'd had enough of cramped barracks, loud city noise, and waking up to someone else's whistle. So when I retired and found a quiet 3-acre property at the edge of Green Hollow Estates, I thought I'd finally struck gold. It had a modest 2-bedroom ranch-style home, a field of wild grass, and an old red barn that leaned like it had stories to tell. I wasn't technically inside the HOA's jurisdiction. My property was one of the grandfathered parcels that predated the suburban sprawl. But I still shared a fence line with the outermost homes of the Green Hollow development. From my back porch, I could see their pristine, identical roofs and chemically green lawns stretching like a cloned army down the hill. And they could probably see my goats. Yeah, goats. That was my retirement dream. Not golf, not fishing, not selling knives on the home shopping network. I wanted to raise goats. Dairy goats, to be exact. I named the first 2 after my Army buddies, Hank and Colby. Then came Marshmallow Peanut Gloria and Duke. They weren't just livestock. They were loud, curious, affectionate personalities with hooves. They bleated when I came outside, and they'd nibble on my boots like puppies. And every morning I'd fill a stainless steel pail with fresh milk and think, this is what peace looks like. I kept the barn clean, didn't let the goats wander, and maintained my fence better than most city homeowners cared for their picket gates. I even landscaped the edges facing the Green Hollow fence with wildflowers and lavender, hoping it would soften the rural contrast for the suburban folks. But apparently lavender couldn't mask what one neighbor called the odor of the apocalypse. The first letter came in a glossy envelope embossed with the Green Hollow HOA seal in raised gold foil. It was slipped under my gate one morning like some kind of royal decree. Inside, a letter typed in Comic Sans no less informed me that several neighbors have reported excessive barn animal noise, visual disturbance, and scent pollution that may interfere with communal property values. It was signed, Sincerely, the Green Hollow Board. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. I didn't respond, assuming it was a one-off. Maybe a bored neighbor. Maybe someone's dog was barking and they blamed my goats. But then came the second letter, and then a visit. It was a bright Saturday morning. The sun was out, the goats were grazing, and I was cleaning the underside of the tractor when I heard the crunch of expensive shoes on gravel. I need to speak to the owner, a sharp voice called. I pushed myself up with a grunt and found a woman standing just past my mailbox. She was in her late 50s, draped in pastel linen, holding a clipboard like a sword and wearing the kind of sunglasses that say, I get my hair done at a place that also serves champagne. I'm Karen Jennings, she said, tilting her head to glance past me toward the barn. President of the HOA. I wiped my hands on a rag, and this isn't HOA land. Her smile tightened. Technically, no. But your proximity to our community means we have an interest in ensuring the aesthetic harmony and environmental integrity of our neighborhood. Aesthetic harmony, I repeated. You mean my goats. I mean the scent, the noise, and frankly the eyesore of a barn that's in clear view of 5 homeowners. I crossed my arms. The barn's been here since 1952. And those homes were built in 2011. You do the math. She didn't like that. I could see it in the way her eyebrows twitched beneath her Botox-frozen forehead. I'm simply here to encourage neighborly cooperation. Perhaps you could consider relocating the goats to the other side of your property. I raised an eyebrow. Where? The side that faces the protected wetlands. The one I'm legally barred from fencing or using for livestock. Karen pursed her lips. Well, surely you understand our concerns. I gave her a long look, then gestured to the lavender beds lining the shared fence. Karen, I've gone out of my way to be courteous. I didn't have to plant flowers. I didn't have to spend weekends fixing up that old barn so it wouldn't be an eyesore. I didn't even have to let your landscapers use my spigot when they forgot theirs last summer. But I did. Because I believe in neighborly cooperation. So I'd appreciate if you took your clipboard and left my property the same way you came in quietly. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she spun on her heel, marched back to her Lexus, and drove off without another word. I figured that was the end of it, that I'd made my point clear and she'd back off. I was wrong. Very wrong. Because the thing about people like Karen is they don't stop when they're told no. They escalate. They dig in. They find new angles, and as I'd soon learn, she wasn't done with me or my goats. Not even close. A week passed after Karen's little visit, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe she'd gotten the message. The goats were quiet, the weather was pleasant, and I went about my routines without any further interruption, milking at dawn, minor repairs around the barn mid-morning, a hot cup of coffee with my boots up by 2 p.m. I even brought out an old wooden bench to set under the sycamore tree facing the barn, a place to read in peace while Gloria nibbled the weeds around my boots. But the quiet didn't last. It started with the kids. Not the goats, the humankind. One afternoon, while cleaning out the lower stalls, I heard giggling by the fence. 3 children, likely from one of the new homes backing up to my property, stood watching the goats with fascination. One of the boys even tossed a handful of granola over the fence, which Gloria promptly devoured. I walked over and waved, not unkindly. "Hey there, fellas. They're sweet, but best not to feed them without asking. They've got strict diet." They nodded and ran off, but the next day they were back. And the day after that, I found a bag of popcorn in the pen, half chewed and soggy with goat saliva. I left a short note in a plastic sleeve on the fence, kindly asking neighbors to keep their children from feeding my animals. The next morning, the popcorn was replaced with a rock tied to a string and a note of its own. "They shouldn't be so close to our homes anyway." That was when I knew. It wasn't just Karen anymore. She was rallying the neighborhood. A few days later, an email popped up in my inbox. It came from an address that read, greenhollowcompliance@outlook.com, mail to greenhollowcompliance@outlook.com. Not even an official HOA email. But the subject line was clear. Notice of violation non-conforming structures and livestock concerns. I clicked. Inside was a formal-looking document, the kind someone builds from a Google Doc template, with enough legalese to sound important. It claimed that 1. The barn visually disrupted the skyline of adjacent homes. 2. The smell of active animal husbandry created an unlivable perimeter for Green Hollow's northern residences. 3. The presence of goats violated Green Hollow's land use restrictions per Covenant 6.3a, which they included as a PDF. Now, Covenant 6.3a might mean something if I lived under the HOA. But I didn't. I replied in plain English. "I do not live within the Green Hollow HOA boundaries. Your covenants are not enforceable on my property. Cease and desist further communication unless through proper municipal channels." I didn't expect a response. I didn't get one. But I did wake up the next morning to find a strange white powder sprinkled along the fence line. I didn't know what it was at first. Lime pest repellent, some kind of soil treatment. I took a photo and sent it to my old buddy Rick, who'd worked as a USDA inspector for 20 years. His reply was curt. "Smells like ammonium sulfate or cheap bleach lime. Some landscapers use it to burn out animal odors. If it gets wet, it can irritate hooves. Keep your goats away from it." Karen had gone from complaints to biological warfare. I hosed the fence down thoroughly and installed a wireless camera the next day. One of those motion-detecting ones with night vision and cloud backup. I figured if Karen or anyone from her HOA army came near my land again, I'd catch them red-handed. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the camera sent me a motion alert at 2:16 a.m. I opened the app and there she was. Karen leaning over the fence in a windbreaker dumping something from a plastic tub. I paused, the video zoomed in, and screen captured her face under the motion light like a ghost caught mid-haunt. I saved the clip to 3 places, phone external drive and cloud, and decided it was time for a visit of my own. The next morning, I walked into the city planning office with a copy of my property survey, the HOA boundaries, and the screenshot. I met with a clerk named Denise, probably half my age but sharp-eyed, and I explained everything. She confirmed what I already knew. "You're not under HOA control. You never have been. And what you're describing sounds like trespass and harassment." I left with a signed statement verifying my exemption and a printed map from city records. On the way home, I stopped by the sheriff's office. I wasn't filing charges, not yet, but I wanted it on record that I'd been harassed and had camera footage of an HOA member trespassing. But even then, I held back. I was still giving Karen the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she'd stop pushing. I was wrong again. Because 3 days later, Karen would do something that crossed every line, both legal and common sense. She would step over the fence, into my barn, and right into the goats' domain. The day started like any other. A quiet morning sky stretched over my pasture dew, still clinging to the tall blades of grass. The goats were restless. Marshmallow had a habit of nudging the feed buckets before sunrise, and I'd just finished patching a loose hinge on the barn's side door. Hank and Gloria were snorting around the new bale of hay I'd hauled in the day before, and for a moment everything felt still again. That stillness didn't last. Around mid-morning, I caught sight of movement through the slats of the old fence, unnatural movement. Not the rustling of leaves or the slow march of a neighbor walking their dog. No, this was quick and stealthy. I grabbed my thermos and headed toward the barn, not wanting to alarm anyone, but also unwilling to pretend like the creeping feeling under my skin wasn't real. And that's when I saw her. Karen Jennings, not in her usual pastel leisure wear this time. No wide-brimmed sun hat, no HOA clipboard like a knight's shield. No, this time she was dressed for battle well in her version of it. Cargo vest, khaki pants, a cheap ball cap that read "Community Matters," stitched in teal, and sunglasses that seemed more tactical than stylish. She was on my property, again. And this time she was not just standing near the barn, she was halfway inside it. I froze, blinking in disbelief. She didn't notice me at first. She was too busy poking around the feed room, taking pictures with her phone, mumbling something under her breath about code violations and public health hazards. I cleared my throat loud enough to shake dust off the rafters. She startled like a raccoon caught in a trash can. Her head whipped around. "Oh, I didn't realize you were home." "You're in my barn, Karen," I said evenly. "What in God's name are you doing?" She straightened up, brushing invisible dirt from her vest. "I'm conducting a visual inspection on behalf of the HOA." I nearly laughed. "You're on private land. That's not part of your HOA. You're trespassing. You want to explain that to the sheriff?" Her lip twitched. "I received multiple complaints. There's concern about mold infestations, unregulated animal waste. You've got unsealed hay, standing water near that trough, and frankly, the smell is nature, Karen. And last I checked, you don't get to enforce anything past that fence." "I have a right," she snapped, "to ensure property values are protected. Your right ends where my land begins." We stared at each other for a moment, the stale barn air between us thick with tension. Gloria let out a low, curious bleat. Karen's eyes twitched toward the sound, and that's when she made her mistake. She took a step backward, onto the feeding mat. Marshmallow, my biggest goat, saw her first. To him, the sound of someone in that spot meant one thing: food. He sprang forward from his corner, head down in anticipation. Not aggression, just excitement. But to Karen, it might as well have been a bull charging. She let out a high-pitched scream. Then Duke and Hank joined in, trotting over to see what the fuss was about. They weren't aggressive goats, not even a little. But they were territorial and very, very curious. Karen turned to flee, but she had nowhere to go. In her panic, she darted out of the feed room, tripping over a bucket and spilling grain across the center of the barn. That was like sounding the dinner bell. 4 goats surged after her hooves, clattering on the old wood floor. She screamed again. I didn't move. I just watched, stunned, as Karen sprinted across the barn aisle, flailed past the ladder to the hayloft, and then did something so absurd, so surreal, I nearly forgot to pull out my phone. She climbed the ladder. I should repeat that. She climbed the damn ladder. Karen, president of the Green Hollow HOA, clambered up the creaky wooden ladder like her life depended on it, barely managing to heave herself onto the hayloft platform. The goats, unable to follow, stayed at the bottom, looking up with blank expressions of innocent confusion. From above, she shrieked, "Get them away from me, they're wild." I couldn't help myself. I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to lean on the pitchfork for support. "They're goats, Karen. You walked into their barn. You stepped on their food. What did you expect, tea and biscuits?" She clutched her phone like a lifeline. "I'm calling the police. This is assault." "Good," I said, still laughing. "Please do. I'd love for them to see the security footage." That made her pause. "You're recording this?" "Of course I am. Barn camera, Nest Cam, audio and visual." I turned and waved to the camera mounted over the main doorway. "I've got footage of you entering the property, uninvited, trespassing into the barn, poking through my equipment, and triggering a goat stampede by dumping grain on yourself. The only thing you didn't do was milk yourself by mistake." Karen didn't respond. She just sat there on a bale of hay, sweating red-faced, her phone trembling in her hand. Gloria sniffed at the ladder, bleated once, then wandered off in search of something more interesting. Eventually, Karen did call the police. I watched her fumble with the keypad, muttering into her phone like a hostage in a spy movie. Then I walked outside and waited by the front gate. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. The officer was a guy I knew, Deputy Mark Ramirez. We played poker twice a month at the VFW hall. He stepped out, saw me, raised a brow. "Problem, Nate?" I jerked a thumb toward the barn. "You're going to want to see the hayloft." Mark climbed up and I heard him laugh before his head even cleared the platform. Karen's voice shrilled from above. "This is dangerous. I could have died." He climbed down with a straight face, barely holding it together. "She wants to file a report." For what I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know, surprise goat encounter." Karen was escorted off my property, red-faced and muttering about legal action. But by the time Mark left, he couldn't stop chuckling. "You're going to want to keep that footage," he said. "That one's going to the bar story vault." I nodded. "Oh, I've already backed it up 3 times. And then, almost as an afterthought, I uploaded a short silent clip to my private YouTube channel. Just 30 seconds. No names, no commentary. Just a woman in tactical khakis scrambling up a ladder while 4 goats stare up at her like confused children. I titled it, "Karen versus the Goats She Lost." I didn't promote it. I didn't expect it to explode. But it did. I should have known it would go viral. The internet has an insatiable appetite for chaos, and this was grade A HOA chaos with a slapstick twist. Within 12 hours of uploading the video, it had racked up 30,000 views. By the next morning, it had crossed 250,000. By day 3, I was fielding interview requests from podcasters' meme pages and even a syndicated morning show that called it the best barnyard breakdown of the year. Karen, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. I figured she was laying low, licking her wounds. But the silence didn't sit right with me. Karen wasn't the type to retreat, she was the type to reload. Sure enough, the next act came sooner than I thought. That Thursday, I had just finished my afternoon chores when I noticed my mailbox door hanging open. Inside, folded in a plastic sleeve, was another HOA letter, except this one was hand-delivered. No envelope, no stamp. Just folded paper and that familiar passive-aggressive tone that could only come from the desk of Karen Jennings. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Garrett, due to your ongoing refusal to comply with community expectations and following your willful endangerment of a community board member, the Green Hollow HOA has unanimously voted to pursue legal action. You are hereby advised to remove all livestock and non-conforming structures within 14 days or face fines up to $1,000 per violation per day. Additionally, your actions have caused measurable emotional distress and reputational harm. Sincerely, Karen Jennings, HOA President." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my iced tea. The woman trespassed on my property, got chased by goats because she panicked, and stepped into a feed mat, and now she was threatening me with legal action. The absurdity would have been funny if it didn't come wrapped in the scent of escalation. This wasn't just Karen being a nuisance anymore. This was Karen trying to bait me into a fight I didn't start. That night, I made copies of the security footage, printed a timeline of all prior communications, and sent it to my friend Trina, an attorney who specialized in property disputes. She called me 5 minutes after reading the first page. "Let me guess," she said. "She's threatening to sue you for emotional trauma after breaking into your barn." Bingo. "And she's not your HOA, correct? Not by law, not by zoning, not by any stretch." She chuckled. "Well then, my friend, you've got a delicious case of trespass harassment and attempted intimidation. You want to countersue?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want to be ready." And I was. Until Karen showed up again. This time I wasn't home. It was late Friday afternoon when I got the motion alert on my phone. I was down at the feed store loading up on straw and alfalfa when I pulled over and opened the camera app. The familiar grainy live feed flickered, showing the side of my barn, the fence, the lavender beds, and Karen. Again. But this time she wasn't alone. She had a man with her mid-30s, square-jawed clipboard in hand, wearing a navy polo with the HOA logo stitched on the chest like it meant something. They weren't sneaking this time, they were inspecting. Karen was gesturing toward the gutters on the barn, then pointing to the small compost bin beside the coop. The man scribbled on the clipboard. I zoomed in and turned on the mic. That's when I heard it. Violation of Section 8.2 Animal Waste, within 50 feet of communal buffer zones. Communal buffer zones. There were none. My land butted against HOA properties, sure, but their buffer zone was an imaginary term they'd made up to control aesthetics. Then Karen did it. She opened the barn door. Again. No hesitation, no knock, no call. I hit record. The goats didn't panic this time, they just stared. Duke let out a deep grunt from the back stall, but the rest stayed put. It was a warm day. They were sleepy content and not in the mood for nonsense. Karen and Clipboard Man stepped inside like they were conducting a government audit. I hit the intercom. Karen, I said loud and clear through the speaker. You're being recorded. Leave my barn. You are trespassing. This is your final warning. They froze. Clipboard Man looked up startled. Who said that? I repeated, you are being recorded. This is private property. You are not authorized to be here. Leave immediately. Karen's face flushed. We're performing an environmental assessment. You're performing a felony. They backed out slowly, looking around for a camera they couldn't see. I had installed 4 discreetly after the popcorn incident. One of them caught the perfect angle of Karen looking directly into the lens as she stepped out of the barn. I didn't bother confronting her that day. Instead, I called Trina. That's 2 counts of trespassing now, she said. And this time with a witness. Do we escalate? I'll draft a cease and desist and prep for a restraining order. You good with that? Do it. The next morning, I woke up to another surprise. My front gate, usually closed with a standard latch, was wide open. The goats were fine, but the latch was cut clean through. Someone had used bolt cutters. I checked the cameras. No movement, no alert, nothing. And that's when I realized the camera facing the front gate had been disconnected. Someone had reached up and pulled the cable loose from the back of the housing. It wasn't destroyed, just unplugged. Deliberate. Precise. This was no longer neighborhood drama. This was calculated. Targeted. I spent the next 3 hours reinstalling every camera and changing every password. I backed up every file to 3 separate drives, printed hard copies of every letter and email, and wrote down every incident in a dated journal. I wasn't just defending goats anymore. I was preparing for war, and somewhere deep down I knew Karen wasn't done. The sky was threatening rain when it finally happened. The storm had been hanging in the distance all morning, a heavy curtain of clouds pressing low over the rooftops of Green Hollow. I could smell the pressure shift in the air, the scent of wet dust and pine riding the breeze. The goats were restless. That always happened before a downpour. Hank kept pacing along the fence line, while Gloria let out short, annoyed bleats every time thunder rumbled in the distance. I knew better than to let them out into the open pasture. Nervous goats in unpredictable weather were a recipe for chaos. What I didn't expect was that chaos would come thundering straight into my barn from the HOA side of the world. I was just inside the tack room organizing the feed bins when I heard the crash. A loud bang, wood on wood, followed by the unmistakable creak of the side barn door, the one that faced the shared fence with Green Hollow. It was usually bolted shut. Had been for months. But now it swung inward. I stepped out just in time to see Karen. Again. But this time, she wasn't creeping. She wasn't sneaking. She wasn't accompanied by a clipboard-carrying lackey or pretending to inspect anything. She was storming into the barn like she owned it, a small Bluetooth headset clipped to her ear and a stack of papers waving in one hand like some unholy scripture. "You've left me no choice," she shouted over the sound of rising wind. "We've passed a special board resolution. This structure is being declared a public nuisance. I am placing this barn, your barn, under immediate abatement." I stared at her. "Karen, I don't know what you think this is, but you are trespassing. Again. And I'm calling the—" She cut me off. "No, I've already notified code enforcement. They'll be here within the hour." "You've notified code enforcement about land that doesn't belong to you." She didn't even pause. "We have full legal authority to initiate civil abatement procedures under Green Hollow's charter extension." "Karen," I said slowly, "you are not a municipality. You are a group of volunteers who water lawns and yell about garbage cans." She took another step forward, still holding that cursed stack of papers. I could see they were half highlighted with phrases like hazardous exposure, animal containment violation, and disruption to community values scrawled across them. That's when she made the mistake. She stepped directly into the middle of the goat enclosure. Through the temporary gate I'd been fixing, onto a pile of feed pellets I hadn't yet swept up. The goats noticed her before I did. It started with Duke. Duke was the eldest of the herd, and while he was usually calm, he was also the most territorial. Karen's shrill tone, the sudden movement, and the blatant intrusion triggered something ancient in his stubborn brain. He let out a sharp snort, stomped one hoof, and charged. Karen screamed. She spun to run, but tripped on a feed bucket and fell backward into the hay. Marshmallow, my youngest and fastest, sprinted toward her thinking it was playtime. Not to be outdone, Hank and Gloria bolted from the back pen, hooves clattering against the wood like thunder. Karen scrambled to her feet, face-pale arms flailing wildly, and bolted for the only exit she could see, the narrow stair to the hayloft ladder. "No," I shouted. "Don't go up there." Too late. She was halfway up the rungs, shrieking as if chased by a pack of wolves. I rushed forward, tried to grab the goat's attention, but it was no use. The spilled pellets had made the entire pen into a snack free-for-all. The goats weren't angry, they were enthusiastic. They wanted to play, to sniff, to investigate. Karen, on the other hand, saw only a stampede of Satan's foot soldiers. By the time she reached the loft, she was wheezing, panting, clinging to a rafter with both hands. Her headset had fallen off and was dangling by a wire from her collar. "Get them away from me!" she screamed. I couldn't help it. I laughed. I leaned on the stall rail and let out a full-bodied laugh that had me doubled over, tears forming in my eyes. The absurdity of it all, the self-righteousness, the trespassing, the goats thundering around like curious toddlers, it was too much. She glared at me from the rafters. "I'm calling emergency services." "You already called code enforcement," I said between gasps. "You want me to help you dial 911 from up there?" She fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping it. Her hands were shaking. Her hair was stuck to her forehead in damp strands. The mighty Karen Jennings, queen of the HOA, now perched like a hysterical gargoyle on the hayloft beam. And that's when Duke, bless his fuzzy little heart, did the unexpected. He trotted up the ladder rungs with the agility of a mountain goat. Karen screamed like she'd seen a ghost. The poor guy didn't even touch her. He just poked his nose over the edge, curious. But to Karen, that was the final straw. She stood up too quickly, slipped on a patch of loose hay, and tumbled backward directly onto a soft, fresh pile of alfalfa. Not high enough to hurt, but high enough to bruise her dignity. I climbed over the gate and knelt beside her as she groaned. "You all right?" She batted my hand away. "Don't touch me." A moment later, sirens howled in the distance. I helped her to her feet anyway. She was muttering now about lawsuits, dangerous animals, negligence, community standards. Her pants were ripped at the knee. Her blouse was smeared with hay dust and pellet crumbs. She looked like she'd just escaped a stampede, which I suppose, in her mind, she had. When the deputies arrived, I stood aside and let them gather her statement first. She waved her arms pointed at the goats, accused them of targeted aggression. Deputy Ramirez arrived on the second unit. His eyes locked with mine, and he gave me a look that said, "Here we go again." "You have the footage?" he asked. "Better," I said, holding up my phone. "Live stream." One of my friends was watching the whole thing from Idaho. Karen's face drained of color. "Would you like me to email it to the department?" I asked, oh so helpfully. She said nothing. Just stood there in the middle of my barn, surrounded by bemused goats, a ruined blouse, and the shreds of her authority. The deputies took her outside. Ramirez hung back. "You gonna press charges?" he asked me. "Not yet," I said, "but I'll take that report number." He handed it to me, grinning. "I'll be at poker night next week. Can I tell this one?" "Only if you bring good beer." I stood alone in the barn after that, surrounded by the quiet sounds of shuffling hooves and the occasional satisfied bleat. The goats, of course, were heroes. Karen had been chased onto a roof by farm animals. But in the HOA's eyes, I was just getting started, because now they'd try to hit back. By the time the deputies left my property, and Karen was safely deposited back in her Lexus, mud-smeared and seething, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd retreat. But I had forgotten the most important rule of dealing with power-hungry people like her: the more embarrassed they are, the more dangerous they become. And Karen Jennings had just been publicly humiliated in a barn by goats. It didn't take long for the video to make its rounds again. Although I hadn't uploaded it directly this time, my buddy Rick, who'd been watching the live stream I'd shared in our group chat, took the liberty of clipping the best 10 seconds and posting it to Reddit under the title, HOA, Lady Gets Goat Cancelled by Farm Squad. Within 48 hours, the video hit over 1.3 million views. Every reaction was pure gold. The way that goat climbs the ladder. I can't. This is why I don't mess with farmers. Karen got outvoted by the livestock. Democracy wins. One creative soul even added dramatic opera music to the clip and turned it into a meme. La Traviata, Goateria. It was hilarious, for everyone but Karen. I was on my porch sipping coffee when a black Escalade I didn't recognize pulled up outside my gate. A suited man stepped out, bald, polished sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. He introduced himself as David Marston, a communications attorney retained by the Green Hollow HOA. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter claiming I had publicly defamed a sitting HOA official, encouraged dangerous behavior from livestock, incited community-wide ridicule that caused irreparable reputational harm. It demanded that I remove any and all footage of Karen from my social media accounts, which I didn't even post, to issue a written apology to the HOA and agree to a cooperation hearing about animal control concerns. I had 7 days to comply or face legal action. I read it twice, looked back up at Marston and said, "Did you actually watch the video?" He blinked. I was advised not to. Of course. He left without another word. I called Trina that afternoon and forwarded her the entire packet. She called back 30 minutes later laughing. "This isn't a legal letter. It's a scare tactic, a poorly written one. Should I worry? Nope. You don't have to take anything down. You didn't post it. And even if you had, it's protected speech. She entered your property. You recorded her legally. She fell into a pile of hay. It's the HOA's ego that's bruised, not the law. So they're bluffing. Oh, they're bluffing like they're in Vegas and they've got a 2 and a 7. Still, the situation was escalating. The views kept rising. So did the inbox messages. News outlets were now sniffing around. I even got a DM from someone claiming to be a producer for a late-night talk show. But more concerning than that was the growing pressure Karen must have been facing from within her own HOA. I saw it in the small things, neighbors walking their dogs faster past my property, some of them now averting their eyes. One even had the gall to flip me off while jogging by. The next morning, I found a sign zip-tied to my fence. "This is not a petting zoo. Keep your disease-carrying goats away." And then came the anonymous complaint to animal control. A uniformed officer showed up with a clipboard and a tired smile. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "We got a report that your goats were underfed, aggressive, and possibly diseased." I blinked. "Seriously?" She nodded. "We have to follow up, but I can already tell this is probably retaliation. I saw the video. My kids love it." I chuckled. "You want to meet them? The goats, I mean." "Not my kids. I don't have any." She laughed. "Sure." 10 minutes later, she was petting Marshmallow and giving Gloria neck scratches. She walked through the barn, inspected the feed bins, checked the water supply, and made notes with a grin. "You take better care of these animals than most people take care of their dogs." Try telling that to Karen Jennings. I'd rather not. I already had to deal with her once over a Christmas lights dispute. She tried to cite someone for putting up blue lights instead of HOA-approved white. She handed me a clean inspection slip. "You're fine. I'll mark this as unfounded." But just when I thought things couldn't get weirder, Karen called a press conference. It was surreal. She set it up at the edge of Green Hollow's manicured park, just past the gated entrance. A podium, a folding table with a white cloth bearing the HOA's logo, and 3 other board members flanking her like bodyguards. A small group of residents gathered, though more than a few seemed confused about why they were there. And Karen, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and pearls, stood at the microphone and delivered the most unhinged 5-minute speech I'd ever witnessed. She declared the viral video a targeted attack against neighborhood values. She claimed she had been lured into the barn under false pretenses. She said she feared for her life when wild goats had cornered her and climbed objects in pursuit. She even accused me by name of operating an unlicensed farm facility designed to humiliate and endanger. I watched the live stream on my laptop with a cup of tea. Trina called halfway through. "She's imploding," she said. "No kidding. This is amazing. The more she talks, the less credible she becomes. She just publicly admitted to entering your property and to being scared of goats." We both laughed. Then I said, "What's the next move?" We wait. The HOA board is under pressure. Karen just put a spotlight on herself, and not in a good way. If they're smart, they'll cut her loose. They're not smart, I said. She paused. Okay, then get ready, because they'll try something drastic next. And they did. The retaliation didn't come in the form of another letter or even a visit from Karen. It came through my mailbox again this time, with a blue sticker slapped across the top of a very official-looking envelope. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from the County Office of Zoning and Planning. Inside was a notice of land use violation. Apparently, according to newly submitted reports, I was 1. Operating an unregistered agricultural facility in a non-agricultural zone. 2. Housing more animals than the zoning permitted. And 3. Using structures, namely my barn and storage shed, without proper post-construction compliance review. I read the paper 3 times, my heart slowly hardening with each word. It was clear what this was. The HOA had filed a formal complaint to the county, hoping to use real government channels to do what Karen couldn't do with her clipboard, and faux legalese shut me down. I called Trina again. She was already ahead of me. I've seen these before, she said. Classic abuse of bureaucratic process. They're hoping you panic, hoping you don't know the codes. Well, I said, pulling open the drawer that held my property file. Good thing I do. See, when I bought this land, I didn't just look at square footage and fences. I'd spent the better part of 2 months combing through the county archives, learning the zoning codes line by line. It was part military conditioning, part retirement boredom. I knew my property was zoned as Rural Residential Plus, a rare designation that allowed for up to 10 head of livestock, up to 2 accessory structures, and full exemption from HOA jurisdiction if the parcel was recorded before 1990. Mine was recorded in 1974. I faxed a copy of the original deed and my exemption clause to Trina, who added a few legal notes and marched it down to the zoning board herself. Within 3 days, the violation was retracted. But that didn't stop the HOA from trying again. Next came the pop noise complaints. 3 citations from the Community Mediation Panel, each claiming excessive animal noise between the hours of 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. The documents even included handwritten testimony from nearby residents who claimed my goats were howling and screaming every morning like possessed devils. I would have laughed, except now this was starting to affect my insurance. My home and property policy provider called to reassess noise risk after the citations were logged in the county database. They scheduled a site inspection. I met the adjuster in a clean flannel shirt, boots, polished and barn swept so thoroughly you could have served dinner off the floor. He shook my hand, looked around and said, "Honestly, this is the cleanest goat barn I've ever seen. You even compost." I nodded. Properly. Aerated. Nothing leaves the property. He whistled and snapped a few photos. The goats watched him like curious spectators, Duke, even giving him a friendly sniff. No smells, no runoff, no excessive noise. You're well within decibel tolerance. Honestly, I've been to HOA neighborhoods with barking dogs louder than this. He closed his clipboard. I'll file my report tonight. You're fine. I thanked him, again and again. But the constant defense was wearing on me. I didn't say it out loud, but part of me was tired. Not from the goats, not from the work, but from the fact that I had to justify my own peaceful life every single day to people who bought their way into authority and mistook their lawn care committee for a government agency. It came to a head one morning when I stepped outside to find orange spray paint on the gravel near my fence line. Someone had drawn a property line violation, arrow pointing toward my barn. They had even staked a small sign that said, "Fence disputed survey pending." It was the last straw. I went into the house, grabbed my binder, pulled out my certified boundary survey, and marched straight down to City Hall. I walked into the Office of County Records, dropped the document on the desk, and said I want this entered publicly in the Land Parcel Dispute Registry today. The clerk nodded and made a few copies. Any issues I should know about? Oh, just a suburban dictatorship trying to colonize my goats. She laughed. We've had 5 calls about that neighborhood this month. You're not the first. The moment the record was logged, I forwarded it directly to the HOA's email inbox with a simple note. Dear Karen and Green Hollow HOA, I am now on record with the county as the sole legal owner of Parcel 41A3R, including all structures and fencing as currently established. Any further attempts to interfere with my property, animals, or zoning status will result in immediate legal counteraction. Regards, Nate Garrett. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one from a different email address. greenhollowresidentthelp@gmail.com. Mail to greenhollowresidentthelp@gmail.com. It read, Mr. Garrett, not everyone in Green Hollow supports Karen. Many of us think she's gone too far. Please know that several residents are on your side. We're sorry for what she's done. We just didn't know how to speak up until now. A concerned neighbor. That email did more for my heart than all the legal victories combined. It meant something. It meant they were starting to see. Karen wasn't just an overzealous neighbor anymore. She had become a symbol of unchecked power, a walking HOA horror story. But as I was about to find out, people like Karen don't go quietly. I knew if I wanted to shut this down for good, I had to stop playing defense. Karen had been coming at me from every angle: letters, fake legal threats, county complaints, and smear campaigns. She thought I was just some old man with goats. What she didn't know, what she never even bothered to ask, was that I spent 26 years not only in uniform, but also as a base logistics officer, which meant I had written more reports, filed more official forms, and built more airtight chains of evidence than she'd seen HOA newsletters in her lifetime. But there was something else. In the Army, my last assignment before retirement was serving as liaison officer for military land transition agreements. I had helped develop land use policies between municipalities and federal zones. I'd sat at the table with lawyers, engineers, and surveyors from 5 different states. And when I bought this property, I did it with full knowledge of how zoning maps, setback lines, and historical grandfather clauses worked. In short, I didn't just own this land, I knew it better than anyone in the county. And now it was time to use that knowledge. I began with the original land charter, dug it out of the archive, made a certified copy, and highlighted the section that mattered most. Parcel 41A3R is hereby exempt from all subsequent residential overlay zones unless explicitly included in a future zoning referendum. No such referendum had ever passed, which meant legally, Green Hollow HOA had no jurisdiction. Then I cross-referenced the jurisdictional boundary maps from 1992, 2001, and 2014. All showed my property clearly outside the HOA-imposed overlay. Next came the zoning exemption clause under agricultural use allowance for rural residential plus parcels, stating, up to 10 livestock animals may be kept provided waste is contained and pasture is rotated seasonally. I printed everything, bound it in a thick blue folder. Then I wrote a formal notice of landowner rights and legal standing and sent copies to on the HOA board, the county zoning office, the sheriff's department, the state agriculture department, the local paper. And just for good measure, I attached the viral goat video with the caption, and this was the catalyst for a harassment campaign against a law-abiding veteran landowner. Within 48 hours, I got a call. It was from a county commissioner's office. Mr. Garrett, the woman said, we received your notice. I've reviewed your documentation personally. I want to apologize for the oversight on the zoning complaint that was filed under your address. We've formally closed the complaint and removed all citations from your record. Appreciate it, I said. There's more, she added. I've also spoken with the HOA. We've informed them their actions are out of bounds. They were not pleased. Let me guess, Karen didn't take it well. You could say that. She threatened to sue us for negligence. I told her she was welcome to try. I chuckled. Sounds like her. The next day, I held a meeting of my own. Not an HOA meeting, but something better. I sent out handwritten invitations to 10 families along the edge of Green Hollow, folks whose homes backed up to my property, who had once filed complaints or watched from their decks in silence. I invited them to come meet the goats walk the pasture and learn about the work I did. 8 of them showed up. They were surprised, I could tell. The barn was clean. The animals were calm. There were no smells, no chaos, just peaceful rural life. One woman, Ellen, said honestly, this is the quietest property in the neighborhood. I don't know what Karen's been talking about. She's been trying to build a case where there isn't one, I said. I just wanted you to see the truth with your own eyes. By the end of the tour, Gloria had made a new best friend with a 7-year-old boy named Max. Marshmallow had tried to eat someone's shoelace. It was a hit. That night, I found a small gift basket on my porch, cheese crackers, a thank you note. No signature. Just a small post-it that read, "You've got more allies than you think. We're sorry it took us so long." I placed the basket on the kitchen table and sat down in the chair by the window, sipping a cold beer and staring out at the lavender that lined the fence. It was dusk. The sky was painted in streaks of peach and violet. The goats had settled down, and for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared let myself feel: peace. Until I got the certified letter the next morning. Karen was suing me, personally, for emotional trauma, digital defamation, and this was real livestock-related terror. I held the paper in my hands, blinked once, and just said aloud, "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" I called Trina. She was quiet for a moment after reading it, then said, "This is actually good." "Good. Yeah, now we go to court. And now, we get to subpoena her trespass, her camera footage, her fake citations, her county complaints, her HOA meeting minutes, all of it, under oath. You think she'll go through with it? She won't make it past deposition. But if she does," Trina's voice dropped with delight, "then we'll bury her in truth." For the first time since this all began, I smiled without bitterness. Karen thought the barn was the battlefield. She hadn't seen the courtroom yet. The courthouse was smaller than you'd expect, just 2 floors with beige walls and a lobby that smelled like old files and faint floor wax. Nothing dramatic, no marble columns or gallery gasps like in a TV drama. But for me, walking through those glass doors with Trina by my side felt more satisfying than any grand entrance could have delivered. Karen was already inside. She sat at the far end of the hallway, flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked more like they'd been dragged here than willingly arrived. Karen wore a navy blazer and a pearl necklace that caught the fluorescent light like it owed her money. Her face was tight stern, masking the storm brewing beneath. Trina nudged me. "She's posturing. Let her." "Wasn't planning to do anything else," I said, suppressing a grin. "We were here for a preliminary hearing, what they call a Rule 12 conference. Basically, it was a chance for both parties to present their basic claims before the court decided if this thing had legs." Karen had filed on 4 counts. 1. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. 2. Negligent animal ownership. 3. Defamation, digital and verbal. 4. Hostile conduct in a shared community environment. Trina had countered with a motion to dismiss, citing the inapplicability of all 4 claims, a counterclaim for trespassing, a request for sanctions due to the abuse of the court system for personal vendettas. When the judge entered, gray hair glasses perched halfway down his nose, and a slow, methodical tone, you could feel the room settle like a lake before dawn. Karen's lawyer, a stiff, nervous man named Daniel Lister, stood and began reading her side like he was performing in community theater. He referenced the trauma of being chased by livestock, the public ridicule of the video, and how my weaponization of social media had created an unsafe and hostile atmosphere for all Green Hollow residents. Trina let him finish without interruption. Then it was her turn. She stood slowly, calmly, like she had all day, and nothing to prove. She handed the judge a small stack of neatly labeled exhibits, each one a chronological damning piece of Karen's story unraveling. Exhibit A, she began, is a copy of the property deed for Parcel 41A3R, showing that my client's land has been exempt from HOA jurisdiction since its registration in 1974. Exhibit B, zoning maps from 3 decades, confirming the same. Exhibit C, a notarized letter from the county commissioner acknowledging the HOA's lack of authority. Exhibit D, 3 separate police reports, each documenting Ms. Jennings trespassing onto private property. Exhibit E, security footage of the incident in question, which clearly shows my client's goats acting non-aggressively, and Ms. Jennings climbing a ladder on her own volition. She turned to the judge, her voice smooth and neutral. There is no chase. There was no aggression. What occurred was the predictable result of a woman willfully entering a livestock barn uninvited, disturbing the animals and panicking when they behaved like animals. The judge nodded slowly. And finally, Exhibit F, she said, tapping the last folder, is a formal letter from the state veterinarian's office, declaring the goats healthy, the facilities compliant, and the noise levels negligible. Karen shifted in her chair, but Trina wasn't done. Your Honor, this suit is not about injury. It's about ego. Ms. Jennings was embarrassed when her own actions were recorded and shared publicly. She's attempting to silence and punish a man who dared to protect his rights, who, may I add, is a retired veteran lawfully living on land he's owned and maintained with care and responsibility. If anything, this court should be asking why Ms. Jennings believed she had the authority to act as sheriff in a jurisdiction she doesn't govern. Silence followed. Even Karen's own board members stared straight ahead. The judge leafed through the files. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he closed the folder, removed his glasses, and said, "Mr. Lister, would you care to respond?" Lister coughed. "Your Honor, while my client may have overstepped in moments of passion, the broader issue is one of public perception." She was humiliated. Her leadership role has been undermined. Surely some consideration. "Mr. Lister," the judge interrupted, "your client trespassed multiple times. That's not passion. That's a pattern." He turned to Karen. "Ms. Jennings, I strongly suggest you drop this case. You're unlikely to prevail, and frankly, you should consider yourself fortunate that Mr. Garrett isn't pursuing further legal action. Yet." Karen's lips parted like she might argue, but then closed again. Her shoulders sank ever so slightly. The judge continued, "This court finds no basis to proceed with the plaintiff's claims. Motion to dismiss is granted. Counterclaims are reserved pending future filings. This matter is closed." The gavel fell with a soft knock. And just like that, it was over. At least in the courtroom. Outside, Karen brushed past me without a word. I watched her stalk toward the parking lot, clutching her briefcase like a lifeline. One of the board members, an older man named George, hesitated before following her. He glanced at me, then said quietly, "She's stepping down. The rest of the board met last night. We've had enough." I nodded. "Took you long enough." He gave me a sheepish smile and disappeared down the corridor. Back home, the goats were waiting. I pulled into the gravel drive, stepped out, and walked straight to the barn. The air smelled of hay and lavender. Duke nudged my hip with his nose. Marshmallow wagged her tail like a dog. I sat on a hay bale, let Gloria rest her chin on my knee, and closed my eyes for a long moment. Justice doesn't always come fast or loud, but when it does, it tastes like victory dusted with alfalfa. I reached for my phone, typed out a short post on the town's neighborhood board. Update. As of today, the court has dismissed all claims filed by the Green Hollow HOA and Ms. Jennings. All citations, complaints, and alleged violations were deemed unfounded or unlawful. My goats, I'm happy to report, remain undefeated. Nate. Within minutes, hearts and thumbs up trickled in. Then came a comment from someone I didn't expect. Ellen M. "I'll thank you for standing up for yourself, and by extension, for all of us who've been too afraid to say anything. You reminded us what real neighbors look like." The week after the court ruling felt surreal, like waking up from a long, slow-moving storm. My land was the same. My goats still bleated at the same sunrises. My barn still creaked in all the old familiar places. But something in the air had shifted almost imperceptibly, like tension lifting after holding your breath too long. It wasn't just that Karen was gone from the HOA board. It was that for the first time, the silence from my neighbors wasn't avoidance. It was respect. I didn't hear another complaint. No more citations, fake violations, or trash on my property. Instead, I started getting visitors first cautiously, then curiously. Couples from Green Hollow walking their kids to my fence line, asking if their children could say hi to the goats. Elderly neighbors I'd never spoken to stopped to wave from across the road. Even the jogger who once flipped me off now gave me a sheepish thumbs up every morning. It was subtle but undeniable the community had turned. One Saturday morning, I found a folded note tucked into the latch of my front gate. No envelope, just a crumpled piece of lined notebook paper scrawled in careful cursive. "Dear Mr. Garrett, I was one of the residents who signed the early complaints. I believed Karen when she said you were dangerous or unstable. I see now that she manipulated all of us. I'm sorry I didn't think for myself sooner. If you're ever open to it, I'd love to bring my grandson to see the goats. Sincerely, a neighbor who's learning." I read it twice, folded it slowly, and placed it next to my coffee mug. There was something deeply humbling about that line. A neighbor who's learning. In a world where people doubled down on bad behavior, this woman had done the opposite. She'd reached out. That afternoon, I hung a small hand-painted wooden sign on the outer fence. Well, community petting hours, Saturdays 10 to 2. Kids must be accompanied by adults. Goats must be bribed with kindness and carrots. It wasn't a business. I wasn't charging a dime. But the visits became something more than just casual. They became healing. There was Marcia, a quiet teenager who barely spoke, but would sit with Marshmallow for hours, braiding flowers into her collar. There was Mr. Keller, a retired chemistry teacher who brought a fold-out chair and read aloud to Duke every week like it was a podcast. And there was Max the little boy with the shoelace-eating goat friend who drew crayon pictures of Gloria and taped them to my barn door. The goats had become Green Hollow's unofficial mascots. One day, the school down the road called and asked if I'd be willing to give a short talk for their Community Heroes Week. I nearly laughed, me a hero, but I agreed. I walked in wearing my cleanest flannel and a pair of scuffed boots, carrying a photo of each goat and a basket of soap I'd made from their milk. I talked to a class of wide-eyed second graders about responsibility boundaries and why goats don't like being surprised by clipboards. At the end, one girl raised her hand and asked, "Is it true your goat chased a lady onto the roof?" I hesitated, then smiled. Yes, but only because she was somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. The teacher winked. That's a good lesson. Back home, the barn had taken on a new rhythm. It wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to the community in the gentlest way. People helped repaint the exterior, donated old tools, and offered spare feed. Someone even brought a handmade welcome sign that read, "Oi Goat Haven, fenced with love not rules." But the most surprising moment came a month later, when I got a call from the new president of the Green Hollow HOA. A woman named Rachel, much younger, softer spoken. She asked if we could meet. I agreed cautiously. We sat on opposite ends of the picnic table by my barn, sipping iced tea while Marshmallow snored in the shade. Rachel started, "I know we're not entitled to your time, but I want you to know the board has changed. We've updated the charter to explicitly respect property lines, clarified boundaries, and removed language that allowed any board member to enforce codes outside HOA zones." "That's smart," I said. "Long overdue." She nodded. I also wanted to apologize, on behalf of everyone. I studied her for a moment, then said, "Apology accepted. But don't make the same mistake twice. Power without accountability becomes poison." "I understand." We shook hands. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I believed it was genuine. I wish I could say the story ended there, wrapped neatly with goats in sunbeams and neighbors holding hands. But life isn't like that. Life keeps moving. Seasons change. Goats get older. So do we. But something did end that day. The notion that someone could bully me out of my home or silence me through paperwork and threats. That's gone now. In its place, I found something stronger. Not revenge. Not just victory. But a sense of belonging, because after all the courtrooms, cameras, and chaos, what I remember most is this: a quiet morning, a breeze carrying the scent of hay and lavender, and the sound of Gloria's gentle snort as she lays her head against my chest. No one controls peace. You build it. One fence post, one neighbor, one goat at a time.